Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, let us see different types of API invocations. So here you can see synchronous invocation is one type and asynchronous invocation is one type and stream-based invocation is one type. That is, we can also say it as pole-based invocation. This synchronous invocation, we call it as request response invocation. In this, what happens is whenever the request sent by the request sent, then the response also got back. In this invocation, the request will be sent and response got back. So if you take an example of API gateway, if a client sends a request to API gateway, then if a client sends request to API gateway, then the request is sent again to Lambda function. Then again, Lambda function will send back the response to API gateway, then API gateway will send back the response to client again. Whenever, if sometimes the request which is sent by the API gateway will fails. At that case, the response won't comes back, right? So during that time, this API gateway will send a error message to the client, right? Yeah. So whenever if your function fails, then triggering is responsible by yourself only. You need to again trigger the same API gateway, then it will trigger the Lambda function, then only we can get the response. So in this synchronous mode, we don't have retries, automatic retries which are possible by the gateway. So in order to invoke Lambda function, do in order to invoke Lambda function synchronously, what is the command that we use, sir? We can invoke Lambda function by using AWS SDK or CLI invoking command. So let us see CLI invoking command for this. Here in two ways you can able to invoke your Lambda function. By using CLI, you can able to invoke by using this command AWS Lambda invoke function name. Here in place of my function, you need to write whatever the function name that your function has and hyphen CLI binary format raw in base 64 out and payload is whatever the key value pair that you have and response in the form of JSON. So this is one way. This is one way to invoke your synchronous API invocation. And the another way is by using invocation type parameter. Here you can see invocation type. Yes, by using this parameter, providing this invocation type as request response. By using this invocation type parameter as request response. So you're just writing the same code, that is AWS Lambda invoke, and invocation type is what? Request response. And you return the same CLI binary format as raw in base 64 and payload is same key value pair with response.json. So in this way you can able to invoke your synchronous function. In this way you can able to invoke your Lambda function synchronously. Another type is asynchronous invocation. In this, it comes under event-based model. Whenever an event occur, then corresponding to that, your invocation happens and your Lambda function will work. Here in this invocation, there is no response, only request will send. So in common case, we use this asynchronous invocation while using S3 or SNS. Whenever an object is, if you take an example of S3, whenever an object file is put in S3, then if we want to invoke Lambda function, then we can able to invoke the Lambda function, but we don't get response back. So if you want response back, then you must need to add a business logic to get the response back. Unless and until you haven't added the response in your business logic, the response won't get back to the function invocation in this function invocation. Okay, so this, how to invoke this? Let's see how to invoke this function, asynchronous function invocation. We can do this asynchronous invocation by using this, by using invocation, by putting the invocation parameter as event. That's it. Here you can see the same invocation code I written, and just I changed the invocation type. That is what? Event. That's it. I haven't changed anything. This is how the invocation happens. So in synchronous invocation, do we have any retries? Whenever, due to any reason, if my response got failed or throttled, if my function returns error or throttled, do I got any retries? No. So, but in asynchronous invocation, if function returns error or throttled, if function returns error or throttled, it will be managed by asynchronous retries. It will be managed by asynchronous retries. So here we uses a built-in queues. So events that we send to our Lambda function will first move under queues. Then eventually those events will be executed at the function. So if any event can't process, then that send you a failed event to, then you can send that failed event to either dead letter queue or Lambda destination. In the dead letter queue, you can able to receive event content only, but in Lambda destinations, it can able to store both request and payload and response context and payload as well. So the recommendation is choose destinations, Lambda destinations, to store the failed events. So here in this asynchronous, it will provide you this, that is a failed events storage as well, where and where we store dead letter queue and Lambda destination. The final one is stream or poll based model. In this model, we just poll messages out of streams or queue based services. So let's say the services may be DynamoDB or Kinesis or SQS. If you want to poll your data which is present in these services, then you can use it. Even this model of invocation will filter the invocation, and then only it will send the data to Lambda function based on message mapping. So in this case, based on message mapping, it will send to Lambda function. You can even take DynamoDB or Kinesis streams or SQS whenever you want poll based messages out of stream or queue based service, then use this. So in this, what happens? Filtering happens, and based on your match case only, this will filter and provide the data to the Lambda function. So to process items from streams or queues, you can create event source mapping to process items which are present in streams or queues. You need to use event based mapping. Among these three models, which invocation is right for me, sir? So you can choose based on your use case. You can use this synchronous invocation whenever you have an use case that if your app needs to wait for response, if your app expecting some response, then the synchronous model is better. It helps to maintain your order. So let's say your app, that is your function, runs for long period of time and does not need to wait for response, then what is best? Asynchronous based invocation is better. It offers automatic retries as well and built-in queues as well to put your functions in a queue format. And whenever any function fails, you can even put that in dead letter queue, or else you can able to put in lambda destinations as well, right? Yeah. So when do this stream based polling, stream based invocation or poll based invocation is used, sir? If you want to process messages from stream or queue, if you want to filter the data, then you can use this stream based invocation or poll based invocation. These are the different types of invocation techniques that we use in AWS. So what is the other invocation we have? We have service based invocation. In that service based invocation, you cannot select any invocation type. AWS will select the invocation method for you. In API invocation only you will select. In service invocation, you cannot select. So I hope you understood about invocation models which are available to invoke your Lambda function. Invoking is nothing but triggering only. So I hope you understood this video, understood the content of invocation. So thanks for watching. See you back in the next video. Until then, bye bye.